Hi, my name is Kevin Miguel Garcia. My preferred pronouns right now are they, them, theirs, but I always tell people, if you're fam, you can, call me whatever you want. Hey girl, what's up, dude? Hey man, hey lady, whatever's good. Um, but like for folks who are just meeting me, I'm just like, I want you to locate my gender outside of just male or female because it floats between them.
Mhm.
So they, them is good for me most days. And I live in Atlanta, Georgia. I'm a seminary student. I'm creeping up on finals, and that's my life right now.
And
You
you
know.
do so much. You have a podcast. You just
Yeah. So
started
I'm a
the Love. Hmm.
I'm a content creator. So I've been doing blogging and podcasting and videos talking about intersections of Christian faith, sexuality, gender, and justice. I'm a part of this thing called the Innovative Love Coalition, and we are launching our first worship album. So if you go to bit.ly/God Our Ally, you can find out more about that project.
It's awesome. It's everywhere. I'm loving it.
I'm really excited. I will say, like, we really got to step it up, though. We only have 20 days and still, like, a good chunk of the way to go. So if you're out there and you've got some cash money and you believe that we need better, inclusive worship music by queer folks, come
Mm,
my way.
love it. Loving it. So you are also, we all are also benefiting from your wisdom in the Q chat responses.
Yeah, that's been
So
really cool.
yeah, I love it. I'm having a blast. So you responded to a couple of them. Um, Two different sections. Let me be a little bit more clear. One was on identity formation, and one was on anti-racism.
hmm
Tell me a little bit about, I know that at conference, your middle name was really important to you, that
hmm
using that has become something that you're really wanting
Yeah.
to uh, hold with a lot of importance. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah. So I am Mexican and Filipino, and and white. I'm a mixture of all of the things. And growing up, my last name was always Garcia, and so I knew that I was Mexican in some way or another. But because of my father's job, he was a military man, and just kind of our proximity to like living in the South, living in country, and like given that me and my brother's skin, we all look like white people. We were raised white, we were treated white, and I also found out a couple years ago that my mother intentionally named us like European sounding names
Hmm.
so that we wouldn't get screwed over in job interviews. Like if someone saw our application, they wouldn't think one way or another about it. Which
Wow.
in one way is like I totally understand why my mother made that choice, and at the same time, it makes me a little sad because I never got to really embrace that part of my heritage growing up. So during I came out and I started really looking into things like critical mixed race Christology, um, looking into and learning about what racial justice really was. I I kind of had this space where I hit this point where I was just like, I want to be seen for all of who I am, and I want to be more visible.
Hmm.
And so as my legal middle name is Michael, but I changed it to Miguel and became Kevin Miguel Garcia, because I wanted my all of who I am, including my heritage, to be included in that. So for me, changing my middle name was a way to reclaim that part of myself and to begin um, exploring that part of who I am. Because I think for a lot of us, for people who are mixed race, who are white passing and cis passing, there's a lot. I mean, I'll acknowledge there's a whole lot of privilege that comes with it. And so for me to, in many ways, I tell people like, please introduce me as Kevin Miguel Garcia, so that there's no. I don't want to like. I don't like as much as I know I'm coded and read as white. It's READ, red as white. Um, Again, it's one of those things. I want you to locate me in your mind as not being like, yes, there is white in my percentage, and I benefit from that. And also, there's this whole rich heritage that I also get to bring with me.
Hmm.
Um, so that was a big part of it. I'm still learning um, how to be a good ally to the Latinx community. I'm still learning what it is to, in some ways, like learning what it is to be a person of mixed race origin. Um, and so yeah, that's the kind of the skinny on that.
Hmm.
I hope that makes sense.
Total sense. Would you consider yourself not only an ally, but in some ways part of the Latinx community?
Yeah, that was actually a question I got uh, during one of my first. I was a part of the Academy for Racial Justice that the Reformation Project
Hmm.
puts on every single year before their conference. And so when I went through my first one, Matthew Vines asked me, he's like, "Do you consider yourself a person of color?" And I said, I don't know,
Hmm.
because I have, again, it's all about, it's not all about, it's just, I'm red as white and I was
Hmm.
raised white.
Hmm.
And, well, and the thing is just like, I have Mexican family in California.
Hmm.
And when I'm with them, like, it just, I mean, let me say this. Yes, I do consider myself part of the Latinx community. I wasn't raised in it, and living in the South, like, I don't find myself in a lot of the spaces. A lot of the spaces I find myself in now are like, uh, queer spaces, queer, non-binary, trans spaces, spaces designated for um, people of color, and that for me has been really healing. It's one of those things where it's really easy to say I'm not Latinx enough. There's like I'm not, or even like for my Filipino heritage, that I'm not Asian enough for those things. But I always kind of like, depending on who's leading the space, I check in with them and it's just like, is it okay for me to be here? Because I
Hmm.
want to be a part of it. I want to embrace these parts of myself, and I also want to make sure that for people in the room, I don't want them to feel disturbed by me, if that makes
Hmm.
sense.
Oh, for
So
sure.
it's still something that I'm growing in.
Hmm.
And I would really still like to, and I'm still learning a
Yep,
lot. But yeah, I would consider myself part of the community. Especially since reconnecting with my family, it's been really cool.
absolutely. My computer's gonna die, so I'm gonna get my charger, and then I have a fascinating story for you, so I will be right back. I
Great.
can't believe I forgot to do this.
All right, I'm ready for a story.
Okay, so my story. So all my life, I've grown up um, identifying as a person of color. And I think colorism has been so incredibly shaming for me. So when other people of color are darker than who I am, or they have a darker skin shade, that they judge me because my skin isn't dark enough to be qualified
Mm-hmm.
as a person of color. But then I step back and I look at all of the other factors like education and what my parents do for a living and our traditions, our culture, our food. I am, like this random 10% of ancestral genetic makeup. 40% of my genes is from Spain, and the other 40% is Native American from Mexico.
Mm-hmm. Indigenous
And
Mexican descent.
yeah, and so this really massive piece of who I am gets totally overlooked and in some ways even derogated by other people in the Latinx community. And it's one of those situations where I don't identify as white, and that's not culturally what I identify with at all. But then, so for the Latino community or the Latinx community, I'm not dark enough, but for the white community, I'm not white. And so I kind of feel you saying like there's this middle ground, and it can be really, really shaming on both sides, I guess is what I'm trying
Yeah,
to say.
yeah, and I resonate with that because I wrote a blog a few years ago, and I was figuring all this stuff out about how like it can be really easy to not feel Latinx enough, or not whatever enough. And even I think like within like the Latinx community, like I've seen media out there. There's a really great channel on YouTube called Pero Like, and also Mi Gente,
Hmm.
which is all stuff made for Latinx folks. But like they talk about this, like how even like you can be raised in a household, but like for example, like, I don't know how to speak Spanish.
Hmm.
I want to learn, and I'm trying to learn. Um, but like that's a huge uniting thing that so many people have that I don't,
Hmm.
and it sucks because
Hmm.
like when I want to go connect with my family, like I can have a conversation for like 5 minutes maybe in
Right.
Spanish, and then like after that my skill set just stops.
Hmm.
But yeah, I resonate with that. It's interesting. And this it's what feels really interesting for me is both the feeling of not feeling like enough for the community that is part of my heritage, and at the same time, kind of recognizing the privilege I do have as someone who has I have a red beard and pale skin.
Mm-hmm.
So like, um, I think that's something that I personally am super aware of. Um, and I think that's why I try to make myself as visible as possible.
Mm-hmm.
That was one of the reasons I changed my name,
Mm-hmm.
is because I wanted people to see all of that and not just the red beard.
Mm-hmm.
And the same reason I try to present as queer as possible in spaces I'm in, because like I want people to not see me as just one thing. I'd rather you see me as like as close to who I am as I can present.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. In what ways do you feel um, privilege in either a positive way or a negative way kind of impacting the way that you exist as a Christian in religious spaces?
Mm. I think because of my upbringing within evangelicalism and my white family that lives in Tennessee, that's who I mainly grew up with. Like in religious spaces, especially the kind of Christian religious spaces that we work through, I find it really easy for me to. It's more easy for me to navigate spaces like that. I don't feel. I'm not someone who feels triggered by things like worship music. I don't feel triggered uh, by a lot of things that other people might do, and I also like. I don't pick up on a lot of things that could be offensive to other people sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm like I'm deaf. When it, for example, like when it's a room full of white people, I feel weird.
Mm-hmm.
Like I don't like I'm like okay, I know that you guys think that
Mm-hmm.
we're copacetic, but just like there's this other part of me that you don't see.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so it makes me feel a little uncomfortable sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so as far as like the privilege goes, and then I sometimes wonder too, is that even though my last name is Garcia, and I am, there's no hiding that I'm Mexican because of that. I think there is. I sometimes wonder how much of my success comes from being read as white.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Like how much success on my podcast, my YouTube channel, my speaking gigs, whatever it is. I don't think that it's not a stretch to say that it's possible
Mm-hmm.
and likely that I've benefited from my skin color,
Right.
even though I am mixed.
Mm-hmm.
So I'd
It's
say,
almost, go ahead.
go ahead.
I was just going to say, I think that in what you're saying, and I totally resonate with you here, but privilege can be like this thing that we benefit from, but also this thing that we really, really despise. I'll give you
Yeah,
an example. You know what I mean? Like
I do.
to be read
Yeah.
as white in a room full of white people. I totally agree with you. I'm like I'm the only brown person in here. I don't speak their language. I don't know what they're laughing at. I don't resonate with this music or whatever it is in these religious spaces, and I'm totally a fish out of water here. And then to in some ways have success as a psychotherapist or whatever it may be because I'm read as white is so frustrating for me because it almost feels like I'm betraying my heritage, like I'm almost a fraud. That in some
Yeah.
way, my mother, who was illiterate till she was 21, and my dad, who worked in a factory, that it's almost like that isn't respected in my context, my history, my story,
Yeah.
when I have privilege. And that might, I feel almost even guilty for hating having privilege, but it's a thing.
I same because I think about my father. He was adopted into from his mother to a different family because his mother couldn't take care of him.
Hmm.
He was kicked out of the house when he was 16, was forced to join the military at 18, and then because of that, like, basically had his like identity stripped from him.
Hmm.
And then we never got to engage with it as children in our family. Even though
Hmm.
my father's first language was Spanish, even though the food he ate was a certain way, like um, we never got to connect with that. And I feel like I carry around a lot of shame from not being able to that I don't have that. I can't connect with that. And
Hmm.
and like I so desperately want to. I so
Mm-hmm.
desperately wish I had that.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so like yeah, there's certainly advantages to having a name like Kevin, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Or a name like Isaac for that matter. But
Mm-hmm.
like the truth is that there's so much rich history
Mm-hmm.
that and culture that comes with it. And so like especially since I started reconnecting with my Mexican family in California and learning about my family tree. My family tree is fascinating
Really?
and so full of like beauty and wonder. We may have found out who my biological grandfather was. We don't know. We're still working on it.
Wow.
But it's one of those things where just like I don't want to I don't want to and I shouldn't have to deny those parts of myself. You know?
Absolutely. Right. You shouldn't have to deny them because other people can't understand them.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Kinji Kuramitsu, who is I mean, you know him, but he is a
Sure.
theologian, and I can't remember what he's getting like 2 degrees right now because he's a madman. um, but he talks oftentimes about being mixed race himself, being Japanese and Hawaiian, um, and what it's been like for him,
Mm-hmm.
identifying differently than his siblings, even.
Mm-hmm.
Because Kenji, again, is also like, he changed, like, much like myself, or like much like him, he changed his name so that he could be more closely representative of who he really was.
Sure.
But he often talks about this, like, feeling of, because my brothers, like, I wouldn't say my brothers engage in the same way with our heritage as I do. Because, like, like I think it has to do a lot with my own queerness.
Mm-hmm.
Is that because I'm queer, I've had to interrogate what I think about everything, like
Mm-hmm.
what I think about God, religion, church, job, work, race,
Mm-hmm.
and so I think for me, the blessing of queerness is what has pushed me into trying to figure out where I land. And I think sometimes maybe we don't land.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes it's just like you kind of have to float through the ambiguity sometimes of it all, or that
Mm-hmm.
it's not even ambiguity. It's just like it's a middle space.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's not like it's unclear. It's for me, it's very clear.
Mm-hmm.
You know that I'm just right here.
Right. Right. If you could maybe, if you could really have a plane land on one specific area, in other words, if there was one truth about your identity that you wish people could just really internalize for you, what would it be?
Mm. In specifically to race and
Yeah.
ethnicity and things like
Yeah.
that. I think it would be that I wish people could. I wish people could and wish people would just see all of me as much as they could.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think about the people I hang out with, like it's mostly people of color, it's mostly queer folks, and
Mm-hmm.
so those are the spaces I tend to occupy,
Mm-hmm.
um, and that's where I feel most at home.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I wish that other people could recognize that a little bit more, because
Mm-hmm.
sometimes um, like I don't. I live in Atlanta, so like, brunch culture is a thing. But like, I showed up to a brunch one time and it's like all cis white male gay.
Uh-huh.
And I'm like,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
or like if I'm invited to a party, I'm just like, oh, it's all cis white male gay.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And it's just like, what? And I ask myself, what am I doing here?
Right. Yeah.
And I guess I just wish people would not make assumptions. I
Mm-hmm.
don't know if that even answers your question, but
Totally.
like,
Totally.
uh,
Well,
I
I think
just
what you're describing for me is almost like the perpetual recognition that you're different in all of those
yeah,
spaces, and that maybe that people could hold that with respect.
yeah,
Yeah.
I think so.
Mhm.
I think that sums it up actually really nicely.
Awesome. So if we were going to pivot and go specifically to identity formation, let me think of some answers here. Or questions, do you feel like there was a time when you foreclosed on your identity when you just kind of put a stake in the ground and said, I'm not going to explore, I'm not going to ask tough questions, I'm just going to identify the way people want me to identify.
Oh yeah, that was all during my like repression slash reparative therapy days.
Hmm.
Is when because like there's a right way to be a biblical man and woman. There's a right way to do sexuality. There's a right way to do relationships, and
Hmm.
there's a right way to do church. And so because I was, I am Christian and I was raised in it, still a part of who I am. I I capitulated because I wanted to belong so badly. And that's like what's so interesting about evangelicalism in many ways, especially and I'm, hashtag not all evangelicals are bad.
Hmm.
But I will say like by and large, like within the South white evangelical spaces, um, people are really, really good at like bringing you in and making sure you're part of the community if you like fall in line
Hmm.
with these things, if you believe the same way, if you identify the right way.
Hmm.
So big that was a big thing for me, was like I wanted so desperately to belong and I would do anything for it. So uh my identity for a long time was like I am a Christian man.
Hmm.
I am a Christian male person who struggles with same-sex attraction, but I'm not gay because gay is an
Hmm.
identity.
Sure.
And that was the point I think where I put it, that you put it, a stake in the ground.
Hmm.
Excuse me. And didn't allow myself to start exploring other things, because to explore other things means that you had to explore your own doubts, and and if you have doubt, that means that you don't believe, and unbelief was not tolerated
Hmm.
in those spaces. And it was so much around just like your identity is in Christ, your identity is in Christ, nothing else matters, your identity is in Christ. And really, when they say your identity is in Christ, it means like your identity is in white Jesus,
Mm.
and white Jesus wants you to do a certain thing. Like this is the will of the Lord. So I think that was a space because I was just so scared to explore anything outside of what was handed to me, because if I did, I risked losing my entire community.
Hmm.
That's what was really hard about it.
What overrode the fear
Um,
to really push you into questioning?
um, to be very frank, it was surviving suicide.
Mm.
After I survived my second attempt, I I sat there thinking, okay, I'm alive again for some
Hmm.
reason, maybe.
Hmm.
And I was just laying there in my bed, a wreck and feeling horrible. And I kept thinking, like, maybe it was one. I came to a question in my mind. It was, and I said, either I gotta buckle down and become celibate because that's the will of the Lord, TM, or maybe I'm wrong.
Hmm.
Maybe there's a different way of looking at this. Maybe there's a different way of being in the world. And so it was, and I said to myself, like, I can't keep living this way. If I'm
Hmm.
going to keep living, I can't keep living this way, because it is exhausting me, and it's making, like, I'm sad all the time.
Hmm.
And my brain space is constantly thinking, like, take captive every thought,
Hmm.
and, don't think about kissing a boy or sex or anything else. And then when
Hmm.
you're trying to suppress the thought, what's the first thing it does?
Hmm.
It's right
Right.
there in your mind.
Oh, for sure.
So I think that was the thing. Shouldn't have been that.
Hmm.
It should like no one should have to try like come to like the brink of death
Hmm.
to figure out like, oh, maybe there's something different here. um and then from that I started to look into more than just what was handed to me.
Hmm.
So I started that's when I discovered QCF, that was GCN at the time. And I read the two essays that were up there. I read God and the Gay Christian, and I realized that, oh, there's different ways of interpreting scriptures,
Hmm.
and maybe truth is not as fixed as we think it is,
Sure.
according to the people in power who told
Hmm.
me what the truth was.
Hmm.
Um, so that's what it was. I wish it wasn't that. I wish the
Hmm.
thing that brought me over was um, curiosity and a supportive group of people who could hold space for the questions I had.
Hmm.
But yeah, that was the thing, which is I have no more to say.
What were maybe the two biggest components that really helped you find self-acceptance?
Mm. It was seeing, I think it was something like I'll give props to my Baptist roots because something within the Baptist culture um, that I love about the Baptist tradition is that we believe that your relationship with Jesus, your relationship with God is yours, and only you know if you are right with the Lord, right?
Hmm.
So to speak, right with the Lord,
Hmm.
whatever that means. But just like there's an efficacy of a relationship that only you can have with God. Um, so I think that was one thing because everyone's saying, "Oh, you're backsliding, you're sliding into the pits of hell and whatnot," and I'm like, "No, I'm not. Like, I really know that I'm not. Like, I can feel God pulling me,
Hmm.
calling me down this direction,
Hmm.
and so I can either be faithful to this call, or I can be disobedient.
Hmm.
You know, if God is calling me forward to bigger and better things into life, like why would I want to stay in a place that's killing me?"
Sure.
Um, and I think the second thing was seeing other people doing it first. Like I went to my first Reformation Project conference in July 2015, and the first person I met there was Shay Washington, who's now one of the directors of TRP. And I met her fiance, now wife. And I was just like, so you're gay and like you're lesbians and you love Jesus and you love each other? And it was just like,
What?
exactly. When you meet other queer Christians for the first time and you see them not only like tentatively stepping around, but just
Hmm.
like living out their full calling
Hmm.
as queer Christians, living out the promises of their baptism, as people in the main line would put it,
Hmm.
like it begins to change your idea of what's possible. It's the same idea of
Absolutely.
just like you cannot be what you cannot see,
Right.
right?
Right.
And
Right.
so that's what I try to be as visible as possible because I want as many people in the world to see that there's a different way to be Christian.
Hmm.
There's a better way to be Christian, in my opinion. So that is the really big part of it. It was seeing other people go first and just trusting
Hmm.
that God is as good as we believe God is. That God really isn't going to forsake us. That, the
Absolutely.
very last verse in the Gospels, behold, I am with you even unto the end of the age.
Hmm.
Like, if I can't trust that, even if I'm wrong, that's another thing too, is like, I'm not scared I think that if I could add a third thing, I'm not
Sure.
scared of being wrong.
Hmm.
Because if I am wrong, God God's love has to be big enough to cover my mistakes,
Hmm.
to cover something that I believe is leading me toward abundant life and helping lead other people toward abundant life.
Hmm.
Um, and so if I am wrong, whatever consciousness is after we leave these bodies, I think you know, God is big enough to handle my possible mistakes, but I also
Hmm.
don't think I'm wrong.
Right.
And also, what's really lovely too is by being able to admit that I could be wrong, is I can also look at everybody else, all the naysayers telling me that I'm a dirty sinner who's going to hell. I can look at them and say, if I can be wrong, that means you can be wrong too.
Hmm. Hmm.
And I think that for me is like how I open up conversations with more conservative slash non-affirming people. Is I'm like, can you admit, like, if you really want to have a conversation, you have to admit that you could be wrong,
Hmm. Hmm.
and that I think is it levels the playing field.
Hmm. Absolutely. And it brings in some uh, healthy dose of humility,
Hmm.
you know.
Yeah, and I think that is something that we could all use. And like I'll always go back to like when having conversations with people who are like going to question my identity, is like, yeah, I could be wrong. That's one thing. And two, there's that beautiful, thing that Jesus said is like, you'll know a tree by its fruit, right?
Hmm.
You know. And so I always am just like, let me tell you what you're asking me to do. This is what I was doing. When I was doing that, this is the fruit it bore,
Hmm.
bared, birthed, grew.
I'd help you out here, but I don't know.
Yeah, that's the fruit that came of it. That was the
Amen.
harvest of it was gross, rotten death, like literal. And then
Mm-hmm.
on the flip side of that, what's the fruit of living into this new way of being Christian, this new way of being a follower of Jesus?
Mm-hmm.
Life and life abundant, baby.
Mm-hmm.
Like that to me, if anything, is at least a reason to question what people have always assumed was quote unquote truth with a capital T.
Mm-hmm. So, as a psychotherapist, I think I'm almost, in some ways, anti-behavior focused. Like, I really do not
Oh
looking at
yeah,
behavior because I have so many.
it's
That's
wrong
a whole
question.
thing.
Wrong
Yeah.
question.
But when you say the fruit that you bear, the fruit that you produce, if it's not behavior and if it's
Mhm.
really something that brings confidence, what is the fruit that you know
Mhm.
that you are beloved by God?
I think it's two things, or a few things. The first thing that comes to mind for me is like quality of life in
Okay.
some ways, and not in relation to money, housing situation, but just like the quality of my ability to stay alive.
Mm,
Like that's me. Like I want to live,
mm-hmm.
which I didn't always want to do that.
Sure.
And that I know so many people have had that same feeling. So that to me is one way.
Mm,
I think the other thing is that I am certainly more honest now,
mm,
like across the board about how I'm feeling, about what I want out of a relationship, um, about what I'm willing to and not willing to tolerate in certain relationships. Um, I think that that level of honesty has really set me free in a way that I couldn't have done that before. Like, because I think for a long time I said, yes, I want this, yes, I want this, but the truth was like I never want like
mm,
I never wanted that.
mm-hmm.
Like I was
I
told I had to do a certain thing
right.
or
I
be a
call it
certain kind of way.
yeah. I call it spiritual dishonesty.
Yeah.
It's not even just like saying like yes when I mean no and calling it a lie, but it's like this it's a on the spiritual realm denying who I am as God's creation and being
Hmm.
dishonest with how I'm really feeling truth in my body.
Yeah. And I think also like uh you're kind of like I feel like when we hide this part of ourselves, like we're trying to hide from God.
Hmm.
You know, it's like,
Yeah.
you know, if we want to use like the metaphor of the Genesis story, you know, God is walking around saying, "Hey, where are you?" And like it's like, "Oh, we're hidden because we're naked."
Hmm.
It's like, who told you
Hmm.
your body was bad?
Right.
Who told you that who you are, your desires, your you know, all of these things, who told you that was bad?
Hmm.
You know, I'm a big fan of naked and unashamed. You know, that's what I want
Amen.
to be before God and before humanity in a you know, and metaphorically, I don't love running around naked in public, just for the record. But
In an integrated way.
yeah, I
Yeah.
and that's another thing too, integration. And what I mean by integration is like who I am on the internet is the same person I am in real life. It's the same
Hmm.
person I am in the pulpit. It's the same person I am on YouTube. It's the same
Hmm.
person I am when you and me are just kikiing and having a drink.
Hmm.
You
Yeah.
know, that kind of consistent personhood, I think, is really good fruit because like that shows that like I'm able to live with integrity now,
Hmm.
which was something I don't think I could have done before.
Right. Right. I think one of my personal favorites, I agree with everything you're saying, but one for me is um, learning how to love full-heartedly.
Yes.
It was almost like I couldn't. This is so such a cliche, but it's so true. Like I couldn't love others because I honestly didn't love myself. But then
That's it.
when I felt this like melting, this like
Hmm.
sinking into just beautiful self-acceptance and really falling in love with the way God created me, then I could respect and love the way God created everybody else.
Yes. And that is the whole point of the faith, in my
Hmm.
opinion,
Hmm.
is Jesus came to say, hey, the kingdom of God is in you. You know, power, love lies in you.
Right.
And we, we've been taught like your body's bad, who you are is bad, original sin, the fall, and I'm not a big fan of original sin theology.
Sure.
Hi,
Sorry.
who's there? Just
I
kidding.
don't know.
I'll call you back later.
But yeah.
But that to me is like the whole point of our faith is like if you can learn to see, God in yourself, to see like the beautiful creation that you really are,
Hmm.
it creates the opportunity, I think, to engage with God in the most on the deepest level, like in ways like I tell people all the time, like I was at the Q Christian Parent Summit a couple weeks or last weekend, and I was leading
Hmm.
worship with Rachel on the first night, and one of the parents asked me, she's like, "How's your relationship with God now?" I said, "I am more connected to God than I've ever been in my entire life, and I am more in love with the path of Jesus than I ever thought was possible."
Hmm.
Like that to me is what the whole thing is about.
Hmm.
Is like I know my worth. I know how loved I am. I know
Hmm.
that like I have a purpose in this world, and I know that like I'm worthy of good things.
Hmm. Hmm.
I mean, what more do you really want, right?
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah. Talk about integration. I think that's an incredible piece.
Hmm. And I think what I find interesting too is there's also this sometimes for folks it's they think that perhaps like they don't have a story or a testimony or something like that, or like they like I think sometimes we try to play the comparison game between our stories.
Hmm.
Um, and I'm like, that's not the point.
Hmm. Oh, for sure.
Like if you like you don't your story shouldn't look like my story. If it looks like my story, you're trying to live into my story, and that's not the point.
Hmm.
Um, and I think we can like the path of God's not linear.
Hmm.
Path of God does not. Everybody's path to God is all sorts of different,
Hmm.
and I think there's power in acknowledging those differences and the beauty that it brings
Hmm.
to our community and to the
Hmm.
church.
Hmm. And internally, to know
Yes.
how beautiful your specific gifts are. I like to call them offerings, what I offer inherently when I don't even try just kind of billows out
Yes.
of me.
Yes. Like that's
Hmm.
the thing I talk about. It's like I was at a talk at Whitworth University recently for their Pride Club, and I was sitting there. I'm just like, it's like your presence is a disruption to the power structures just by showing up and being there. You don't have to do nothing. And
Hmm.
I just got chills thinking about that. And
Hmm.
I think that's the power of the Holy Ghost. That's the power of authenticity. That's the power of living into your true self and who God created you to be.
Hmm.
Like you have, like they say, like power to move mountains, baby.
Right.
Power to say to the winds and the storms of our life, peace be still. Power to simply speak to yourself and say you're okay.
Hmm.
Like like I like what you said, an offering, because every offering is beautiful and different and needed.
Hmm.
Because the eye cannot say to the foot, I don't need you.
Hmm. Right. Exactly.
And I think that like learning to be myself, like, because I'll be real, just like I am not the greatest podcaster in the world. I am not the greatest speaker in the world. I'm not the greatest content creator in the world. I'm highly inconsistent. I'm like a B student on all of my papers. That's not like doing is not the point. Freedom is the point.
Exactly.
And I
Yeah.
think that's what Jesus came to talk about. Like Jesus didn't go around teaching people how to set others free. Jesus
Hmm.
gave people an example of how to be free. This
Hmm.
is how you do it. This is how you embody your fullest self. And he was aware. He's like, I am the Son of God. I am in connection with the divine.
Hmm.
And so Jesus was saying to us, like, I pray that my love would be in you and you would be with me because I am with my Father.
Hmm.
So if all those things are true, that means that the only thing for us to do is simply, like, if we figure nothing else out in this life, our
Hmm.
task, our call is to figure out who are you?
Hmm.
What are you doing?
Hmm. Yep.
And, I would say, like, if someone asks me, like, who are you? What do you do? It's like, I am among all the other identities that I love and embody, because I definitely don't want to say my identity is just in Christ. But, like, seriously, like, if I were to break it down to face things, like, I'm a child of God, and that's something that cannot be changed. Like, even if I wanted to, like
Right.
God won't let me go.
Right.
Like it's not up to me anymore because
Mm-hmm.
I've given myself to this path that has allowed me to step into the fullness of who I am and into freedom.
Mm.
So I love that. Bring your offering. Mm.
So, if relationships are a pilgrimage, in my opinion, I think learning how to be in
Whoa,
relationships.
relationships are a pilgrimage? That's good.
Mm,
Sorry, I love that. I'm about to steal
that's
that from
okay.
you.
Go for it. But I do. I think that this is kind of a wave that I really want to infuse is that relationships is probably the biggest pilgrimage we're on.
Yeah.
And one of the biggest ones is the relationship we have with ourselves.
Hmm.
So now that you are feeling more integrated and you understand your worth and your inherent value, what do you feel like is the next segment of your pilgrimage? What's your growth curve?
Um, wow. This is something I've actually been thinking a lot about recently. Um, I think uh, for me personally, the thing I've been really working through is my relationship to like my physical body.
Hmm.
Uh, I don't, there's so, like, so many of us, like, because, like, we're taught, like, the flesh is bad, the flesh is the source of all that is evil.
Mm-hmm.
And, not to, add on top of that, society's pressure to look a certain way, to eat a certain thing,
Mm-hmm.
to do enough yoga to be, like, if it's like this idea of, like, I'm constantly chasing the carrot in front of my face
Mm-hmm.
rather than, um, one way somebody put it to me was just like, how do I love my body for what it is and who she is, who he is, who they are, and for everything that they could become.
Mm-hmm.
Um, my friend Jamie Lee Finch actually like refers to her body as she, as like
Mm-hmm.
this is an actual person that I can have a
Mm-hmm.
relationship with.
Mm-hmm.
And since kind of starting that shift with my body and saying my body's good,
Mm-hmm.
like my like, and also like I give thanks that I am able-bodied
Mm-hmm.
and that uh, I don't have any physical disabilities that keep me from, going to work or doing the things that I need to do.
Mm-hmm.
Um, yeah, I've got mental disabilities and I've got mental illness, and all those things are still good. Like
Mm-hmm.
it's all part of it. So I think for me, like the biggest part of my journey recently is making the choices that lead to life. Like I'm creeping up on 30, and so like I needed to start working out, so I started working out again for like the billionth time, like everybody else has done.
Me
But I
too.
think what's different for me this time versus before, I think was I'm gonna beat my body into submission. Like
Mm-hmm.
I'm gonna make it look a certain thing. I'm gonna be strong and just like and then but he's already strong.
Mm-hmm.
They're already strong and they have kept me alive. Like I think about how much he has survived,
Mm-hmm.
you know?
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, I was all there for it too, but so was he.
Mm-hmm.
And so being able to recognize that my body is a temple of God and that it's good and I've like even if I don't work out another day in my life, I'm still beloved.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's for me like my now relationship to like fitness and physical activity is I want to do things that make me feel good.
Mm-hmm.
What if I don't go to the gym for a week? I'll go today because I have time.
Sure. Sure.
You know, I'll
Mm-hmm.
go to yoga later because I can. I've got time.
Mm-hmm.
But not beating myself up for, you know, losing time or having to change my schedule or doing those other things. So that's like the biggest part of my pilgrimage is uh, really learning to love my body
Mm-hmm.
and appreciating it for what it is, and also appreciating the abilities I do have. Not beating myself up for the abilities I don't have. Like I can't do a side kick. My kickboxing coach is like, do a side kick. I'm like, I can't lift. You want me to put a 90-degree angle in my hips, and I don't have it. Okay.
Uh-huh.
And I'm like, and you're not teaching me how to stretch it out. Anyways, but yeah, it's just a lot of like, I'm learning how to love my body, like
Mm-hmm.
actually love it
Mm-hmm.
and appreciate it, and also like true story. I've been doing this for like 2 weeks now. Every morning when I wake up, I stand naked in front of a mirror and I talk to myself and I talk to my body and I say, thank you.
Mm.
Thank Thank you for doing what you can. Thank
Yeah.
you for like allowing me to live and get through this like crazy, crazy world that is trying to kill us all. Thank you
Hmm.
for being strong when I can't be.
Hmm.
And that level of like gratitude, like your body feels it. Like, and I think
Oh, for
that's
sure.
like, it's like this weird paradox of like I am my body and my body is me and yet I'm not my body,
Hmm. Hmm.
and I think that's
Right.
what we call holy mystery, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
Um,
Yep.
of the same way that God is in us and God is also in you and God is also in everything.
Hmm. Right.
It's a it's been a powerful tool for me to just to love this temple
Mm-hmm.
and to worship in this temple
Hmm.
the God who loves me
Hmm.
and calls me forward into better life. I hope that made sense because that
It
was like
totally
real
makes
woo.
sense.
Okay,
No,
good. Because
totally makes sense.
sometimes I get woo woo and I'm like, I don't know if these people are gonna get it.
No, it makes total sense. Total
Good,
sense.
good.
Thank
Mm.
you. I'm just gonna leave it there.
I think that's a
That
good
was
place to
great.
stop.
Yes, yes.